Hello. Good evening. Good
Hello.
afternoon. Hope you're well.
Good
If
to see everybody.
you want to look at the other page as people arrive, greeting, greetings. Hello. Hmm. So where I'll start now in terms of just letting the attention settle, settle in, settle in within or around your body, knowing that the physical sensations are happening. Sometimes it's helpful to notice how the attention does actually relax, like inclining toward a kind of pausing. Sometimes it can feel like we're laying down in water to float. But it's a shift in how we're relating to moment experience. It's a shifting into a non-doing awareness. And of course, it's helpful to notice if the attention does feel cold, a cold witnessing versus non-cold. It may be not warm, but having an intention to connect with whatever appears. And of course, it's helpful to incline toward some care or tenderness or kindness for life itself as it reveals itself moment by moment. And sometimes the pause is really just that willingness to let things be just as they are. Unknown. So as we shift the attention to receiving sound. Just noticing that pause, or you can just let whatever emerges wordlessly, vibration, texture. It's never ever happened. These textures, these vibrations, always new, changing, alive. I can notice that the silence, we can also receive the textures and vibrations of silence. And as we shift to the sensations in our hand, it's very similar to just being with hearing. It's like listening to music that we're listening to the physical sensations, textures, vibrations, tingling, warmth, coolness, heaviness. Alive, ever changing. Finding peace with things just as they are. Sometimes the shift to the movement of the breath at the abdomen makes that more apparent. Sometimes the sensations are vague. We want them to be more clear or very shallow. We want them to be deeper. Might only last so short or long. The sensations are ungraspable. The attention just jumps in and goes for the ride of rising and falling, including the attention spacing out part of the ride and coming back. And understanding these movements of sensations. We don't have to manipulate, fix, get rid of, control, do anything whatsoever with how they're appearing and disappearing by themselves. We can find that peace with any kind of thought or emotion or hindrance, sleepiness. Always new, fear, attachment, aversion, restlessness, doubt. No need to get rid of, manipulate. It's that letting them just come and go by themselves. Just like the wind, the sound of a bird, aversion, happiness. Or sometimes more clearly, just like clouds in the sky, insubstantial.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, everybody. So we thought we would take questions again today. If anyone has any questions about your practice, about the instructions that we might be able to help you with, um, we would love to hear from you and try to support in any way we can. As usual, the best way to let us know you have a question at the bottom of your little Zoom screen, there should be a button that says react. And if you click that, there's a raise hand. We know you have a question. Otherwise, you can just type into the chat that you have a question. We'll call on you and can ask it there. Or sometimes we notice people trying to press buttons. And it's a sign that there's a question. Hi, Jean. I think you can unmute yourself. Let's see. Yes.
Hi, Jean.
Is it better if I keep my hand up or let it go? I don't know if it
Oh,
makes.
actually, it does matter. Thank you for asking. We haven't said that. It helps to keep it up because then you stay there.
Mhm.
And when you undo it, you vanish back into the squares.
I knew you're like, where did she go? Um, mm. So I just always want to say thank you both very much for um, all that you offer. I appreciate it even when I'm not here on a Sunday. Yeah, yeah. I think as I kind of spend more and more years in this practice, I think it hits me more acutely what it means to be a teacher in this practice, to orient your entire lives around this tradition and this path. And so just very, very deep appreciation from a place where I have no idea what that must be like. um, I think my question is, and I can only ask it because I'm kind of out of it now. But my question is about like despair. Um, just again, the practice kind of dipping in and out of, all of the worldly winds, all of the um, possible orientations and perspectives on life. But um, I've noticed kind of more cleanly, I guess, this sense of despair at the bottom of some of the harder periods. And then, particularly with all that we know that's going on, in the world, and just in terms of between humans and then between humans and this earth and every other species on the planet, um, and then right back down to my own personal life where, either family members are struggling pretty intensely, and then, the next day incredibly joyful, of course, right? It's, the whole 9 yards. But I think just in particular, I'm seeing like how this need for more capacity or for a way to explore. If there can be a little thread to hold on to and explore when despair is at its most acute, it would be really helpful, because then I could come back to the cushion, instead of just reading a book or, kind of escaping in some way. And I'm not, I actually also, I just want to add that I appreciate very much the permission to distract, or to find a kind way of riding alongside whatever's happening. That has been really revelatory for me as well. And I have to say, I miss the cushion when I'm feeling at a really difficult point, and I haven't always, I've often not been able to reorient myself back to the kindness that is the cushion and the practice, the more formal practice. So that's the question, I guess.
So what do you think? Do you want to start? You want me to start? You're muted there.
Either way, which one? I'm ready. You ready?
Go for it.
Okay. I think it's great that you articulated this so well, and that you are aware of that it's even hard to talk about unless you're out of it enough to even put words into it. So the whole sense that you've been able to distract from it, and I hope, I don't know if you've been able to kind of do things like be in a garden or be out in nature. Have you been able to do that?
Yeah, I actually started volunteering at my CSA.
Oh, great. That's
And
great.
You're absolutely right. So good. So good.
Yeah. So that the ability not to kind of, there, I joke about it, but that sense of curling up in the fetal position and getting under the covers, there is a level where that's helpful, right? Like that, like going into a cocoon, just like a butterfly worm, will get born and eat and eat and eat as a worm and then go in the cocoon. That sense of waiting until the system is strong enough to be with it is very helpful. So that if you see the distraction or the being outside of it in nature and not feeling like you have to be with it, that's all essential, right? And then it's like, if you see that, like, it's despair that despairs, not you, right? Like it's happiness that is happy, it's fear that's afraid, it's despair that's that despairs. Sometimes expecting despair to be on the cushion. Just think about it, right? Like think, it's almost like you could do a comedy skit or a tragedy about like trying to make despair sit there in silence for 45 minutes, right? It doesn't really cut the mustard until there's enough of a witness, right? So if you don't have any witness available and you're doing these other things, there is a level of waiting until at the least compassion, right? Like at least there's a way to feel connected with the despair, right? So that's what I mean. Like if you can get on the cushion, metaphorically, and have metta for the despair, that's very different than expecting for despair to be on the cushion and and not have any attention that can be with something, right? Other than it. And that's the key. It's like the key is that of course the teaching is that it doesn't matter what the experience is. What matters is the relationship we have with it. So if there's no possibility for that kind of relationship other than drowning in it, of course you would wait and you would do all these other, what we would call healthy distractions until there's enough ability to start to care. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And I wonder if, yeah, I'll reflect a little more. It feels like there's a knowing, from so many years of practice that there is usually space when I get to the cushion. There's usually a little something. And it's interesting, yeah, the despairing.
Well,
So,
this is really important because actually, if you look at moment-to-moment experience, what you just said is probably true. That's part of what you learn by exploring something like despair, because often doubt, like when you're describing what you did, whether it's like your personal family or like the larger planet or what's going on these days, it's like often what we miss is doubt.
yeah, no, that's it.
And that usually there's a recipe for going down to the bottom, which is, the thing I love about despair is there's no bottom other than despair. Like that, you've hit the bottom and you're gonna bounce there for a while until you can open. There's an opening to the despair that will feel wonderful rather than resisting it. So it's the resistance to it that's so painful. It's not remembering the route into it, because often there will be that helplessness in the face of the suffering that you're describing. There's more than just the word despair. So that helplessness in the face of suffering is completely connected to despair. And seeing that that's a good thing, that you've connected to the suffering, and that the Buddha taught that helplessness and overwhelm are really important. They're to value as far as finding compassion, to care about it. And often I think for most of us, the root is to realize that we're suffering. We might be aware of all the outer suffering, but we're suffering, and that we need to connect with it in ourselves.
Thank you for saying doubt, because, despite knowing a fair bit about doubt, it's like that's I think the piece that I was missing. It's like, you're right, I can feel despair and I can come to the cushion anyway. But when doubt and then helplessness, wrap themselves up in that, then I'm under the covers. So you're right. I mean, it's fetal under the covers with my Kindle or
Yeah, and that's okay. Like that's smart. That's smart.
until it doesn't feel smart or something, like, right?
Well, it's like it didn't work
Didn't work, right?
because the resistance is still there. Meaning it worked up to a certain point, but we've done enough practice to know that we're still oppressed by the despair. But then you try something else. If you know what I mean, it's like it's really being able to be flexible and go outside a lot and reach out to someone if you know you need to. It's like a lot of different aspects to this that are so important, but a lot of it, the remembering of why we're suffering, is that we're resisting the experience. And I think what you're describing is a cluster. I know Jesse will have more to say, but the last thing I would say is that often we each have a hindrance of choice. So if doubt is your hindrance of choice and you're you're exposed to all this suffering, then that usually will be the drive that you're on. Someone else, it might be aversion. You know, somebody else, it might be attachment. But my guess is that a lot of people right now are getting triggered, and the hindrance of choice is coming.
Yay for that.
Well, the good thing about despair is that it kind of forces learning how to practice compassion,
Mm.
which is a great thing. But I don't want to minimize the pain of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I wouldn't trade any of it for the compassion, because you're right. I mean, again, it's true, like a deepening understanding is a lot less of, let me tell you what works, in my repertoire these days. It's more like, oh yeah, right. It's compassion and humility are so closely tied for me. And I appreciate every bit of that practice is giving me. Yeah. Mm. Thank you.
Mm. Jesse.
I was just thinking it's kind of actually in the beginning of how I think there might have been a time, there might be a time where, when you like someone asks a question like that and we joke about, oh, we don't know what you're saying, or no one knows what you're talking about, and it's like we're so far beyond that like level of digesting that truth, of just how much despair there is and how much kind of shared sense of kind of negative future and negative present, um, many people have, and what a weight that is, and really how agonizing it is, and the parts of that that are very real and true are yeah, they're horrific. And so it's like, yeah, I think I do wonder about, just evolutionarily, what are we designed, what are our kind of consciousnesses designed to have capacity around in terms of suffering, or, and that there's been horror in the human existence since the beginning, and and certainly many instances where it's felt overwhelming and there's no uh, sense of it being coming to a quick resolution. Yet there's something about the amount of information we have about, like, oh, they're in this place on the planet, and this place on the planet, and this, this war, these horrors, this ice shelf, um, there's like an inundation of knowing and experience and sympathies and frustration, all this like emotional kind of quality that's not only in like our direct sensory experience, right? It's like the sense of how kind of outside of, not to say that it isn't in our direct sensory experience, but that there's also this kind of the magnitude of it, and every day. And what are our systems actually capable of grieving and processing? I don't know if there's not probably never way going to be to answer that, but I think that it's it feels like a meaningful question still of just like what we're doing to our minds, what the level of expectation we have of being able to process all this in a healthy way. There's just something that is so new, really, evolutionarily on a level, aspects of it. So, that sense of carefulness about kind of how much we're taking in, where the weird mechanism by like the soothing is not always just reading a book or something kind of it gets you out of it. How many of us go to the news or go to things that are actually more triggering and more evocative, as part of that habit, and again, understandable. Um, and that where is that something that, can be, I think that your move to start volunteering, at the CSA, it's like that feels like a very something that I've seen in myself and in others that is very helpful of like having positive human experiences, right, with other humans that are kind, that are generous, that are fun, that are wholesome, um, and you feel like you're a part of something good, is definitely part of what gives us a sense of buoyancy, what gives us a kind of like counter force to that projection of negative future, right, onto the world and onto our own lives, or the earth. um it's not that we don't have good information that all points maybe in that direction, but we also have to take responsibility for the mental fabrication of that, right? Kind of like you were saying about doubt, and that kind of progression of mental pattern that leads to a belief in something, and that there's ways of undermining that pattern, that tendency to build the coherence of that solidity of certainty of negative inevitability, and so that's one thing. It's just like that sense of where are we building in these things. And of course, if you go somewhere and you're having all these relationships and everyone's just talking about how the world's going to collapse, that isn't going to support necessarily that, right? So there is like this dance of what is the culture of those spaces, that we're kind of responsible for helping create, or what is our negotiation around that? Do you go to spaces where no one's thinking about the world, and does that feel too disconnected? I mean, there's a huge range, but that feels really important of just like knowing of goodness, and to understand, of course it's not to deny the magnitude of the bad news. It's also to say that there's so much happening that's so inspiring, and that it doesn't sell newspapers and it doesn't get clicks. And so there's like these other truths about the world right now, as always, that are not going to be the dominant thing. And so that means it's like, how do we find access to that? Where do we create that for ourselves or for other people? Creating spaces that are wholesome and generous and caring and kind, and that sense of like, oh, the capacity for humans to behave in a different way is really there. So I think that move that you've already done in that direction feels really super important. And then it's like we can do more of that. And then of course, where does that get kind of just compulsive, or where do we also need time for the quietude? And I think there's also just the reckoning of like, this is the way things are. And it's what's hard about compassion, but also equanimity of, I think some weeks ago, I spoke about a sutta that I was teaching from on the last retreat around the tendency, the seeds of anger, the seeds of animosity in our hearts and minds of, this person did this to me. This person did this to people I care about, or this person is friends with people I don't care about, or, these sort of like tendencies of the mind to create it. And the part of the Buddha's response was like, well, this person did this. And like, what did you expect? What did you think was going on? And I think that there's some level of that, of like, well, like given the way things are, this is the way things unfold, right? This is what happens next based on these conditions, the momentum of these animosities, the momentum of this, it's kind of, we spoke last week a little about that tendency for the mind to seek vengeance, when it's been harmed, and how powerful that is, and how we all have to sort of see that part of ourselves of wanting, those who have caused suffering to suffer, and be humble about that, right? And whether that's that might not be the flavor. The despair might be more the flavor. Other people might be the anger that's the flavor, or like Michele said, it's going to be addiction, or it's going to be, whatever we use to kind of not feel the weight of these things. But where do we recognize? Where do we acknowledge? It's like, it is overwhelming. It's crazy. You think, I was saying to someone the other day of like, there's like, okay, all the wars and the violence and all these like the human realms of awfulness. And then there's the climate catastrophes. And then there's just something about like reading about like the amount of plastic that we all have in us. You know what I mean? For me, there was just this like, like, game over, whatever. It's just like, what are you gonna do? It's crazy. It's so crazy, like the amount of forever chemicals that are like everywhere and inside of us. It's like, great, well, this is what happens. There is something about that that's important, of like, yeah, this is the world that we've created, and it's understandable. It's not like the bull carving class that we're doing, in the sense of like, God, you see why it's just nice that like machines make bulls, because it's a pain, right? It's like hard. And then you're like, well, what are the consequences of machines making bowls? It's like, well, there's like, it needs energy, and it needs, this machine's going to do it faster than that machine. And suddenly there's like chemicals involved. And, it's like plastic bowls are like really easy, and it's like, yeah, okay, well, this is exactly why. Like we're having like this direct experience of why we don't live in a world where we all are eating out of like wooden bowls, And so this is what happens, is that then we're full of plastic and killing each other and all these things. So it's like there is some piece of equanimity that feels really important, of like, of course this is happening. And then it's that question of like, well, what side are we going to be on? The side of despair and causing more mayhem, and right? Or are we going to like help at the CSA, and are we going to, and it doesn't mean we don't feel the despair. It doesn't mean you're rejecting that experience of grief and healing, and trying to do that individually, collectively, right? But there is just some place of like determination of like, what are you going to do? What are we going to do with our lives? And that sense of like responsibility and that dignity, right? And that potential is really important. And yeah, I mean, and as small or as large as that ends up being, it's just like we see the vortex of these mind states and how they can lead to not getting involved, not cultivating the good, right? And internally and externally. And it's like, well, you cut it. It's like, that is the value, going back to your question and that aspect of it, of practice, which is like the value of that kind of mindfulness, and is the interruptive precision that's possible, right? It's like, oh, doubt, oh, anger, oh, wanting, grief, sadness, and then it's like, and then what, and then what, and then what? It's like noting, it's like, that's the value of that, the rigor, right? And it's the place where the mindfulness is not just like that softness of like relief and receiving. I mean, that is one aspect of it, but the other side of it is the rigor. It's like, no, what is happening? What is going on right now in my mind, in my heart, in my body? What is unfolding? And can I watch that? And that you don't need to necessarily sit down on the cushion. Of course, like sitting down on the cushion is a more, it's a deeper sharpening, right, of that tool. But that there are, like with our carving knives, right? There's like just the stropping. There's the light version of that, which is like, okay, what's happening right now in my system? And that this is a training that is not meant to be just when we're on the cushion, but that we have to learn how to activate it, in our in between times. That it's not just about saying like, okay, I need to stop and go meditate. Though you can sit informally. Walking meditation might be something that's actually, maybe a kind of middle ground. But it's important. And it's like without it, of course, it's like, how do we keep our sanity, in all of it? I was just the other thing I want to show folks. I had a couple, it's like 6 years ago, I made these buttons. I think it was around another election. And I somehow came upon these files. I'm like, I'm gonna make these again. And whoever wants one, I'll send you one. So we'll do it out. It's like, it's not about saying don't vote or that it doesn't matter or whatever. Don't even worry about that. It's about like, there is that level. And then there's the like, where do you keep your sanity of like your views and your opinions and your desires and your angers and your hopes and your despairs? And it's just like, tuck, 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 noting what is happening. And that sometimes takes this other energy, right? This like interruptive, force to whatever pattern is unfolding. It doesn't always have to be that intense, right? There's of course there's the spectrum of it, but that sense that it's very hard to get out of some of these clouds of belief and negative belief, internally, externally. And that is what the mechanism of the Vipassana is sort of about. It is about like watching so closely what's happening that the next moment is not inevitable, right? It ruptures the tendency toward inevitability of where this is all headed, the momentum of despair, the momentum of grief, of anger, of revenge, or whatever it might be, right? And it's like, oh, wanting, sadness, grief, frustration, whatever, heat, coolness, hardness, softness, like get into it, right? And yeah, it's always there. It doesn't have to be about going to, spend 45 minutes on the cushion. That's why we're, practicing. But the cushion helps make it more possible, the other times. Important question. So yeah. Thanks, Jean.
Yeah. I just want to add one more thing, which is if you just consider like a statue of Kuan Yin, the goddess of compassion, and all of her arms, and that was needed a long time ago. That humans need compassion, like, because it's greed, hatred, and delusion are so slippery. So I think that rigor that Jesse's talking about is really just remembering that that's the source of the suffering on the planet. That difficult emotion, that despair. Really, again, it's like if you really care about the despair, it's not a problem at all. And so that remembering that. It's that sense of like, what do we do? It's just like that the ticket the ticket to compassion is the despair. Like that's the valuing. The valuing is that, of course, it's humbling because we're not taught this. Or the planet wouldn't look the way it does. If everyone valued despair as a way to develop more compassion for all of us, the planet would look a lot different. And that's what's so humbling. You know, it's so humbling for us all to get that everything Jesse said or I'm saying or Jean, what you presented is just like that. Why we're here on Sundays, it's like to get that courage, the courage to keep going through these things, so we develop the courage, the compassion, the wisdom that, you know, that's what we're here for. But it is a time. It's an interesting time, as they say. Mm.
Can I just add one more thought? Just as you were talking, Jesse, I was realizing that one of the challenges is too that I'm sitting in, real comfort, right, in my own life. This and I tell my colleagues often, we're rich. We really are quite rich. That we have food on our table, we have heat, we have time that we can spend with friends. We can take a friend out to dinner. I mean, my husband's works is in social work, and so I hear about the full range of human experience, and and so I really recognize this wealth, if you will, this comfort that is my life at this moment. It hasn't always been, and again, it's not like millions and millions of dollars wealth. I don't want to misrepresent. This is just like, living comfortably, right? And knowing, having some relative security at this moment. And so I just realized that there's this dissonance also, between what, like you said, the stream of information coming in, and that whole range of what humans are dealing with, and other species in this planet, and this relative comfort, which I think also heightens the sense of this belief that I can do something from this space of comfort and capacity, and not in any way being able to even plug a little tiny bit of the whole of so anyway, just all that you have said is really helpful in kind of sitting with that reality as well, so appreciate it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know, Michelle. I mean, I think that is I mean, there are many other sort of, yeah, dimensions, of course, right? That can open up. And I think that basic kind of recognition that a certain amount of comfort, a certain amount of privilege doesn't actually make you feel like you have more power around much is really interesting, and it's sort of done. It's kind of an interesting question. It's like, well, what is that then? What are these? What is the place in the role of comfort and privilege in these kind of conditions, and what does it kind of, yeah, insulate us from, and what parts of that are absolutely like what everyone would want, right? And so it's not about saying that it's somehow outside of the context of what, like, humans are all aiming for, most are, for some degree of stability, and to be able to feed themselves and have some time to enjoy their lives and their families and their friends, and be involved in work that's not totally alienating, right? So it's not to disregard that. And I think sometimes there is a meaningful question as to, like, what does that does that invoke a sense of responsibility? Does it invoke a sense of is there something meaningful about going outside of that? You know, anyway, I think it's just like it's a powerful place to keep to explore, and I encourage that. It's as a only tangentially kind of related, but it's there's like a kind of weekly protest that I've been affiliated with for a while, and I don't always go, but the people who do always go weren't able to be there this last week, and so like I grabbed all the stuff and the signs, and it was like there was like a you kind of imagine like a Charlie Chaplin movie of like trying to set up holding a bunch of signs and setting it all up oneself. That was me for a while the other day. And there is this sense of like being and there's no one else who was planning to come. And so it's like, oh, that being that person of like the one person on the street in your community, and there you have a bunch of signs, and you're like you're that sense of the discomfort, right? Of um for lack of a better word, it's like, oh, there's the crazy person who's like out there doing their thing about this. And then it was like I had such a beautiful experience of like how many of like some of the most important people in my life ever were that crazy person, who was out on the street with a sign alone at traffic rush hour because they believed in something that they cared about. And I'm not saying it's like the pinnacle of like involvement and whatever, but I think about we were saying like Robert Aiken Roshi, on Oahu, or my friends Wally and Juanita Nelson, or there's a woman,
Hey,
Frances Crowe in Western Mass, who just, her the anniversary of her death. It's like these people, they would just go out and be like, we're against this. Whatever.
Roshi was in Hilo.
Yeah, but I'm sure
Yeah.
over in even in Kaimuki, he would
Right.
just be
Oh
standing
no,
in the
no,
corner
but it
doing.
was like the Hilo was even more alone. He
Yeah.
was very alone. Yeah.
But anyway, it's just to say this sort of sense of what does being in some place of discomfort around your stance or around what you want to be involved in, or that there was something else in that moment where it was like very helpful for me to go through like whatever um doubt or other considerations that I might have, right? In terms of how I'm perceived, et cetera, et cetera, to like find that place of like, where is that thread of being like, no, this is like, I've been like how inspired I've needed to be by people who have done this, and that was a practice, right? To stand there and be like, to find that place of connection to integrity, and of course ultimately like loving kindness, and that it was a practice. It wasn't on the cushion, but that it was a place of doing that, right? Of being like, of finding and trying to maintain that connection with something really beautiful that feels important, and a lineage of something beautiful that feels important. And there have been many times actually in my life where it's like I could reflect upon where I've done that, maybe not always alone. Um, but that's an important has been an important thing for me. So it might not be that context, but just to say that there is something for sure about getting outside of our comfort and getting outside of our the places where we have a lot of control and ability to protect our the conditions of our around us, that with some degree of, without being reckless, and without being aware of the environment we're in, and all of that, where is there benefit to sometimes like going beyond our comfort zone um for something that we care about? Yeah, 100% for sure. Yeah. 8.
Yeah. Um, I think I have a question around comparison being madness, and I see that it's like better than and less than, and that's wild. Like it's easy to understand, and if there was anything around equal to being madness, um, thankfully I have more time to be in nature in Midwest, and often I feel loneliness into this despair, and there's a sense of slowing down into, and when I'm in nature there's a sense of belonging, and there's like pleasantness and like sense of metta, and there's like conceptual thing that happens often with like identification. It was like, oh, I'm like in nature, I'm sane or something like that. um and that's not, I don't find it like that's like crazy or anything. But um yeah, then I often like thoughts pop in my head about, oh, comparison is madness, and I was like, oh, it doesn't feel as mad as feeling less than nature or better than nature. Yeah.
Michelle, why don't you start? I'm gonna actually go get the book where I recently found that quote, and I'll see if I can find it.
You're muted.
I was muted, Jesse. I didn't know. So, do you want to do the quote and then I can talk? Or I just, I think this is so deep. Like that sense that the Buddha taught that conceit does not disappear until full enlightenment. That there's so many nuances to the feeling that I am equal to, right? You know, like there's these birds here. They're called francolins. They're ground birds, but can you hear them? They just scream. They just scream, and it's like comparison of any other bird here. Even the rooster sounds like a soft caressing sound compared to the francolins. But like you see that immediate the way the human mind just like, I wish it would sound soft, like, right? It's like I compare it equal, like my voice. I compare it to my voice, right? Like the quickness with which it's comparing and judging. And I love that you brought it up because it's like, the Buddha taught, of course, that from the perspective that there's no solid self, right? There's nothing substantial there that's solid, that we're comparing no matter what to what, that there isn't anything there. And that's, love tells me I'm everything, wisdom tells me I'm nothing. But that sense that we're comparing, that we're better than or equal to or less than, and that it's madness because there's nothing there to be comparing with like that in the way that we do. And equal to is very deep. Like it's like the better than or less than is usually more apparent, but the wanting to at the least be equal to, what if it's like we're not good at math in elementary school? Like the level of comparison that's going on when we're kids is unbelievable, So yeah, that it's I think it's something that one has to get some humor with. A lot of humor when we see ourselves doing it, I can do it just, my driving skills are, I have this idea that my driving skills are much better than a lot of people out on the road. And it causes me a lot of suffering, right? Like it's like that, the way that person just backed in there, or like, my father taught me to drive like it was so perfectionistic, but idiosyncratic to say the least. But it's like it's it's amazing for me to watch that quickness of seeing, and then the didn't put the blinker on, right? That, and I would have, right? it's it takes so much humor to just get through 5 minutes in the grocery store when you really look at like somebody pick what they're picking out, like, and how they did it. And it's amazing. I just love that you brought it up because it's so years ago in a 3-month retreat I had somebody that was he didn't fit into the kind of general mainstream of who came to IMS. And I had so much faith in him and his practice. And about 3/4 of the way into the 3-month retreat, he came in and he sat down and he said, "Why can't everyone be like me?" And then he was like, "And then why can't I be like them?" And it was so pure. It was just like that's the purity of seeing that madness. Anyway, I love that. Yeah, I love that it's so deep in us that it takes a lot of. Wow, there it is. There it is. There it is.
Yeah,
Je-
and I appreciate that there is something different that you're experiencing in nature that is I mean, I just think it's one of those things where we have to be careful about how sometimes like the tradition and the suttas can be so black and white about like total liberation and everything else, and there's not always a lot of nuance in terms of like some of what you're saying of like that the feeling worse than other humans, feeling better than nature, feeling worse than nature, or this what I almost hear when you say it is like a sense of belonging, when you're in this other environment, on this other kind of, in that there's something really supportive in that. And so there is also just this sense of it's not like there's no place for that, right? In the tradition, you think about just all the emphasis on Sangha and community. And while that might have meant like a very particular thing in the Buddha's time and when he was talking about Sangha, it's like it does, even that word had a broader meaning in his era of just community, and that sense of where do we feel community and communing, um, to not it's like to trust some sense of where it feels wholesome and it feels supportive and it feels good. And yes, if you're watching every single mind moment of that experience, or there be moments of a sense of identification with, oh, me and the tree and the rabbit and this sameness and equality. Might there be something there that is not like, yes, totally liberated? Sure, of course, but that doesn't mean there might not be other many moments where it's just simply an appreciation, and a sense of safety and security and appreciation and belonging, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't mean that there's not maybe something of like that, yeah, that continued willingness to have rigor around something and investigate and, be curious about it for sure. But I it's like I'd be careful about using like an idea of what should be happening to like get in the way of what the wholesomeness of what is happening, when it's there. And it's interesting, this quote is because I've always heard this phrase, right? It's madness. And I've never been able to find where it's from. And so where I found it is actually not in the suttas, but in the good blue book, the Abhidhamma Sangaha, the kind of compendium of all the bigger volumes of Abhidhamma, Buddhist psychology. And so when it's talking about the unwholesome factors of mind, 7 is conceit, mana. And it has a very narrow definition. Conceit has the characteristic of haughtiness. Its function is self-exaltation. It is manifested as vainglory. There's always like English words that I didn't know. I had to look up. That's how old the translation is. Its proximate cause is greed dissociated from views. It should be regarded as madness. And so it's like there's something kind of interesting in that, right? But even in that sense that this definition of mana, of conceit, is only about the better than side of things. It doesn't include the worse than, it doesn't include the equal to. And so you can see it is actually a more narrow definition of conceit than the Buddha describes, and that's described in the suttas and other places. So here it is really only saying that particular quality is madness, of that haughtiness, of self-exaltation, vainglory. And then, this question, proximate cause is greed dissociated from views. Anyway, there's a footnote. You can look that up. You can get this, PDF of this online. But I think you're right to recognize like that sort of range of what feels really troubling to the mind and unstable in that sense of betterness, or, less worthy than. And what is it about equal to that might feel more stable, less toxic, less problematic, but that ultimately, still has, I would say, still has some quality of identification, of meanness in there, and that is ultimately a barrier to some sense of clear seeing and understanding. Does that feel like it, I don't know, gets to?
Yeah, I think so. It's and yeah, definitely I feel belonging in nature because it's so different. Like everything is different. So I feel okay just being there, just as human, or including unseen beings and things that's non-human. I just feel included. That's all. And that feels very wholesome, and that's awesome. And just yeah, this sense that there was some stickiness around, like, oh, I belong here, because there's a belonging and there's definitely attachment and identification. And I didn't think that was bad, but then yeah, I think it's helpful to think that there's a range, and um even range in madness.
Yeah, there certainly is. But right, I mean, I feel like that's one of the things that, Michele has taught me and all of us so much over, is like, as a child, just how much her going to the woods or going to the lake or going to the forest was like this refuge, of and I think many of us feel some version of that, and it might not be nature, it might be, whatever, it might be the mall, or, I mean, there are things that are we all are weird in our ways of what what we might find that sense of relief in. And of course there are the people that actually identify with other humans. And like, those people seem to enjoy like human society. And that's must be great, because there's a lot of that around. But I do think that I just, there's also this, sometimes it's like we don't know or I don't know, and I think most of us don't know what we may have spent, however many lifetimes in some other realm, in a spirit realm, in a forest, in some other, as a tree, or hundreds of thousands of trees. And so that sense that like we might feel comfortable in certain contexts with certain beings and certain states of mind and certain um, experiences for reasons that we'll never understand, but that sometimes it's just like it is our old family, and we're going back to that. And that's really beautiful. You don't have to be able to know it to know that that's possible. And it is a part of the Buddhist teaching, right? The sense that, everyone you see has once been your mother, daughter, grandchild, niece, nephew, cousin, that there's no, we have all been that for each other through all of the cycles, and that actually includes beings outside of the human and well outside of it, that's like, yeah, who knows why we have a sense of belonging and safety, security, in different environments. So it's great to have it as a resource. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm. Well, Michelle,
Well, Jesse, hmm. We're heading toward October, it looks like. Oh, the turning of the seasons.
seems inevitable.
Mm. We do wish everybody the courage to be where you are, with great love and wisdom, compassion, peace. See you next Sunday.